You won't believe what happened after my last class of the semester. I thought it would be routine one final lecture, some quick goodbyes, and the quiet shuffle towards summer. But what unfolded that afternoon was anything but ordinary. It wasn't just what my students said, it was how he looked at me when he said it. I've spent over 30 years standing behind a lectern, reading faces, deciphering subtext and guiding minds. But that moment, I was wholly unprepared. Before I take you back, tell me, where are you watching from? I love knowing which cities you're tuning in from. It always reminds me how stories stretch far beyond the walls where they begin. Let me walk you through that day. It was the last Thursday of the term. Campus felt unusually still, as if it were holding its breath. Most students were mentally halfway to the beach, or back in their hometowns already. I had just finished my final lecture for comparative literature, one of those cross-temporal courses where we weave in a little old-world philosophy with epic novels and existential angst. The type of subject where mature students lean in and the younger ones shift in their chairs, hoping no one notices their confusion. That tension, I've always loved it. At 63, I've learned to read a classroom like a favorite book. I can spot who's here to drift, who's here to dive deep, and who's searching for themselves between the lines. Julian belonged to the last group. Quiet, intensely present, like he was always on the verge of saying something, but never quite ready. He never interrupted, but he never looked away either. Always the front row, always that steady gaze that sometimes lingered a beat too long for comfort or curiosity. That day, as chairs scraped the floor and backpacks zipped shut, Julian didn't move. I noticed it immediately. I always do. I was gathering my books, slipping my glasses into my bag, when I looked up and saw him still rooted to his seat, staring at the desk, like it might give him an answer. "Julian," I said softly, careful not to startle him. His head snapped up, eyes wide, as though surfacing from a dream. "Professor Evelyn, do you have a moment?" His voice wasn't nervous. It was deliberate. Measured, of course, I said, trying to sound casual, though curiosity was already rising inside me. "Is everything all right?" He hesitated, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. I've been meaning to talk to you. I didn't want to bring it up in class. We were alone now. The classroom had emptied, and the hallway beyond was silent. The old fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a soft, muted stillness in the room. I gestured toward the chair beside my desk. "Go ahead. Take your time." Instead of sitting, Julian stood pacing slowly toward the window, then back again. He moved like someone containing a storm inside him, restless energy, without an outlet. "I know this might be inappropriate," he began, "and I don't mean any disrespect. But I've been thinking about this for weeks. Months, actually." I stayed still, hands resting in my lap. I wasn't afraid, but something had shifted. The air felt different. This wasn't just a student seeking academic advice or a letter of recommendation. This was something else. He finally stopped pacing and looked directly at me. His gaze was darker than usual, perhaps, from the late afternoon light filtering through the blinds, casting long, slanted shadows across his face. You probably don't remember the first time we spoke, he said quietly. It was after your lecture on the age of innocence. You told me I had an old soul. I did remember. I remembered the half smile he gave me then, like he wasn't sure if I was teasing him or paying a rare kind of compliment. That stuck with me, Julian continued. Not because it made me feel clever, but because for the first time I felt seen. Not as a student, as a person. There was a long pause. I could have broken it. I could have chuckled, changed the topic, reached for my purse, and made a polite exit. But I didn't. I listened. He took a step closer, not aggressive. If anything, he seemed almost unsure, exposed in a way I hadn't expected. You make me feel something I haven't felt in a long time, he said. Voice steady, but thick with emotion. Like I don't have to pretend. Like someone understands the parts of me I've never dared show. I lean back slightly, swallowing the knot rising in my throat. I had no prepared lines for this moment. No handbook, no mentor's script. After decades of guiding others, I suddenly wasn't a professor anymore. I was just a woman. Julian, I started, and even I could hear the shift in my voice. It was lower, slower, heavier somehow. But before I could finish, he raised his hand gently. I'm not asking for anything, he said quickly. Truly. I just needed to say it, out loud, at least once before the semester ended. You don't have to respond. I didn't want to walk away and spend the rest of my life wondering what might have happened if I never told you. My lips parted, but I said nothing. There are moments in life when silence carries more weight than any spoken word. In that quiet, late afternoon classroom, with golden light stretching long across the whiteboard and the shadows growing deeper by the second, I felt the truth of Julian's words settle into the space between us. It didn't feel improper. It didn't feel wrong. It just felt true. He smiled, then a small, bittersweet smile that flickered like the last light of a candle. Thank you for listening, he said softly. That's all I needed. And with that, he turned, walking toward the door. But just as his hand touched the knob, something stirred inside me. My voice, usually so practiced and measured, came unbidden. Wait, he turned. In that instant, a single breath in time, I didn't see Julian as my student. I saw him as a man who had peeled back something raw and honest. And I had no idea what I was going to say next. Wait, I repeated, barely recognizing the sound of my own voice. My hand hovered in the air, caught in an uncertain gesture, unsure whether to motion him back or wave the moment away. He paused, one hand still on the door, the sun behind him casting a golden glow around his silhouette, like something from a half-remembered dream. He didn't speak. He simply waited, so I stood slowly, cautiously, as though every movement had meaning now. Not from fear or doubt, but because I sensed I was stepping into a moment I might never be able to undo. I don't know what I'm doing, I said quietly, more to myself than to him, with a self-deprecating smile that barely touched my lips. Julian let go of the door. It clicked shut behind him, the sound final, in a way that made the room feel suddenly smaller. You don't have to know, he replied gently. Neither do I. I let that sit. Strange how freeing it felt to admit I didn't have the answer. After nearly 35 years of being the one who always did, I began to walk slowly around my desk, arms crossed loosely across my chest, a subconscious shield against the tangle of emotions rising inside. I've seen students come and go, I began. Eager, brilliant, distracted, lost. Some disappear the moment final grades are in. Others, I looked at him. Others linger. His eyes didn't flinch. They stayed with mine, no longer intense, but quietly present. It's not your age, I added, sensing he might interject. It was never about that. It's the way you listen, the way you look at people like they matter, like you're not just hearing them, but searching for something deeper. That's rare, especially now. He took a slow, uncertain step toward me. I didn't move back. There was no rush. Only a quiet tension, a magnetic hum between us, delicate and unnamed. I never wanted to cross a line, he said, his voice lower, now more intimate. Not with you. You haven't, I replied. But I think maybe I have. He shook his head gently. No, you were just honest. A silence followed, not awkward, but thick, as if emotion had become the air we were breathing, dense and fragrant and impossible to ignore. I stepped past him to the window and tugged the blinds open slightly. Outside the campus was thinning students heading for their cars, backpacks, bouncing voices, fading into laughter. It looked like a world inside a snow globe, close yet unreachable. I don't get seen this way anymore, I said, still gazing out, not as a woman, just as Professor Evelyn Carter. Or worse, just, ma'am. The world kind of puts you on a shelf after 60. You're not invisible to me, Julian said immediately with a firmness that stopped me. I turned. He stood with his hands in his pockets, shoulders at ease, but fully awake. His gaze held me, not hungry, not expectant, just steady, as though being in my presence was enough. And something about that shifted me. I've spent years teaching about connection, I said, walking slowly toward him. Through literature, poetry, philosophy, all of it circling the same question, what it means to truly be known. And yet, I didn't expect to still be part of that story. You are, he said, a little closer now. I stopped just shy of him, close enough to see the tiny twitch at the corner of his mouth. His jaw was set, but I could feel the quiet nerves beneath his calm exterior, the way he shifted his weight, the subtle tension in his shoulders. I'm not afraid of what you said earlier, I whispered. But I am afraid of what it might mean if I answer. I'm not asking for an answer, he said softly. I'm just here. There is a particular kind of comfort in being seen without having to explain yourself. And in that moment, Julian wasn't my student. I wasn't his professor. The years, the titles, the rules, they fell away. We were just two souls orbiting the same quiet truth. I reached out, letting my fingers brush the edge of the desk. It grounded me like an anchor in unfamiliar waters. I don't think I've let anyone in like this. I murmured not to him, but to the room, to the air between us. Then maybe it's time, he said, his voice calm but resolute. even if it's just for this moment. I looked at him for what felt like forever, weighing every risk, every voice of reason inside me that whispered to maintain the boundary. But reason paled beside the warmth that lingered between us, the slow, budding trust, the quiet gravity of something that felt undeniably real. My hand reached for his gently, cautiously. No urgency, no expectation. And he didn't flinch. His fingers curled lightly around mine. Not in possession, not in boldness. Just enough to say, I see you. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I allowed myself to be seen. That evening, I walked home in silence. The breeze carried the scent of late spring blooms, jasmine honeysuckle, something sweet and fleeting. My heels tapped against the pavement in a steady rhythm as the city melted into twilight. Nothing had happened. And yet, everything had changed. Not because of some confession, but because someone looked into the heart of me and didn't blink, didn't step back. I didn't sleep much that night. My mind wandered, replaying every word, every lingering glance, the stillness that spoke more than either of us dared say aloud. One question pulsed louder than the rest. What now? The next morning, standing in front of my bathroom mirror, I brushed my silver-streaked hair with a tenderness I hadn't given myself in years. I didn't know what came over me, but everything felt different. My skin still held the faint memory of his touch, gentle, brief, but grounding. I didn't know what if anything would come next, but something inside me had shifted direction. When I returned to campus, the halls felt altered, as if I'd walked into a world that looked the same but no longer fit the same way. Students passed me in clusters, laughing, chatting earbuds, living in the current of their youth. I smiled politely at a few former students who nodded at me in passing. But my thoughts were elsewhere, still anchored in that quiet room with Julian's voice in my ears and the light in his eyes etched into memory. I hadn't expected to see him again so soon. But just after lunch, as I stepped into my office, there he was sitting in the chair across from my desk. Calm, composed. And yet, the flicker in his expression told me he wasn't sure if he belonged there. You left the door unlocked, he said softly. I suppose I did, I answered, trying not to let my smile show too much. He rose slowly. His tall frame cast a long shadow across my desk. There was something still about him anchored, but I could tell he was reading me closely, watching to see how I'd receive him now. Would I retreat, revert, redraw the lines? I stepped inside, closing the door behind me, slowly, deliberately. It's just us now, I said. He exhaled the breath, escaping him like he'd been holding it since the moment I entered. I didn't know if I should come, he admitted, stepping a little closer. I'm glad you did, I replied, without plan, without hesitation. And it was the truth. I didn't want to go back. I didn't want to return to a version of myself that kept every soft emotion locked away behind decorum and titles. I wanted to understand what this was, even if it frightened me. He moved to the window, gazing out over the quad. I watched him, the clean lines of his posture, the way his hands clasped behind his back. There was something timeless about him, something present, like he'd been raised to value every second he was given. Last night, he began still facing the window. I kept thinking, did I ruin something? No, I said firmly. He turned to me, eyes searching. I don't regret anything you said, I continued. And I don't regret the silence either. It said more than words ever could. He stepped closer now. I could smell something subtle, cedar maybe, and something else beneath it. Not cologne. Something distinctly him. There's something about you, he said, voice low. I've never felt this way before. Not like this. I looked up at him, my pulse loud in my ears. You don't have to explain it, Julian. But I want to, he said quickly, his voice shaking slightly, thick with emotion. It's not just attraction. It's not some fantasy. It's the way you carry yourself, the way you look at people, the way you made me feel seen before I even realized how invisible I'd been. His words drifted in the air like dust caught in late sunlight. I didn't try to answer them. I let them land. Let the meaning settle. You make me feel alive again, I whispered. And that terrifies me. He didn't try to chase the fear away. He didn't rush to fill the space with promises or declarations. He just stepped close enough for me to feel his presence warm, steady. Let me walk beside you, he said. That was all. We didn't touch. Not yet. But something deeper passed between us in that moment. Something unnamed, but undeniable. It was a kind of connection that didn't require touching, but was enough to make my heart flutter. I realized then that my whole world had changed in just a few short days. I wasn't yearning for youth. I wasn't trying to relive the past. I was stepping into a future I hadn't dared to imagine. We sat side by side on the small chair in my office, the kind that only depressed college students would choose to sit on. And yet, here we were, both of us, mending the pieces of ourselves that we hadn't realized we'd lost. He asked me real questions about my life, about my past, about my favorite book, and the small photo on the bookshelf, where I held my newborn daughter, now grown and living across the country. The questions weren't meant to flatter. He asked because he cared. For years, no one had looked at me as someone to explore, only as someone to learn from or ask for advice. I laughed several times that afternoon, a full, unguarded laugh that woke up the dormant parts of me. The afternoon light faded shadows filtering through the curtains, and I didn't realize how much time had passed. We talked for hours, lost in something that had no name. Finally, he said softly, I should go. But could I see you outside of this place? I paused, not out of doubt, but to listen to the moment. Okay, I said, but not as professor and student. He nodded, accepting it. I walked him to the door. When our hands touched this time, neither of us let go. There was no drama, just two people holding hands. When he left, I went back to my chair and closed my eyes. I didn't know where this was going. I wasn't sure how long it would last. But I knew one thing. For the first time in years, I felt like my story wasn't over. A new chapter was opening, and I wasn't afraid to turn the next page. The days that followed passed like chapters in a book I didn't want to close. We met again, not at school, not in the office, but at a small coffee shop in a suburban bookstore. It had worn wooden floors, mismatched chairs, and a simple menu that never changed. He was there when I arrived with 2 cups of coffee and the same patient gaze. He stood up when he saw me. It was a reflex. Few people did that anymore. "I remember you with ice cream," he said when I looked surprised. Of course I do. We talked, not rushing to talk about what had happened. We talked about the little things, music family early heartbreaks. He told me about his little brother, whom he used to take to school every morning when Mom had to work double shifts. I told him about the summer in Paris after my divorce, but I thought I would be healed, but instead realized my loneliness was deeper than ever. At that moment, the distance between us changed. It was no longer careful circles, but actual steps toward each other. He reached out to brush a crumb from my lips, a small, fleeting movement. But I felt it like a jolt of electricity down my spine. That evening, he walked me to the car. The street was empty, the restaurant was closed, the breeze tugged at the hem of my coat. He stood by the car door, hesitating. "I want to say something," I said, leaning back against the car door. "Yes," he said, "but I don't want to break the rhythm we have." "Go ahead." He stepped closer. "I don't want this to be temporary." The wind blew my hair across my cheeks. I didn't push it away. "I don't want to either," I said. "But I'm afraid it will bring things I'm not ready for." He nodded. Then in a voice as low as a prayer, he asked, "Can I kiss you?" I didn't answer. I just gently moved my hand to the back of his neck and closed the distance. The kiss was slow, gentle, not rushed, not hungry, just tentative and careful, as if we were opening a door no one had ever entered before. In that moment, I felt seen, not just my body, but my soul, my being. We didn't say anything after that. It wasn't necessary. Hands still clasped, eyes parting, and as he turned to walk away, I felt something both painful and beautiful, like the ending of a poem you don't know you need until you hear it. Back home, I looked in the mirror. The gray hair, the wrinkles around my eyes. It was still me, but not the same woman. I saw someone alive, unburdened. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of age, either behind or ahead. We continued to meet, quietly, respectfully outside the rules. He was always gentle, not possessive, not demanding, just present. A rare male gentleness, not imposing anything, just creating space for me to be myself. We took walks, exchanged books, stayed up late, talking about things that were unrelated, but very relevant to us. Not about age, not about power, but 2 people from different chapters of life, meeting at the intersection of truth, timing, and courage. One night on my porch, under a blanket and over a bottle of wine, he turned to me, "You make me want to grow old." I looked at him, my eyes stinging. "And you make me feel like it was worth it," I whispered. "There's something very human being chosen. Not despite the scars, the past, the years, but because of them." He didn't want a perfect version. He wanted the real woman, when I wasn't trying to be someone else. That love wasn't loud, it whispered. It stayed. I don't know what tomorrow will bring. Maybe that's the beauty. There was no map to what we found, no label that fit. But I knew this. He stayed after the lecture, not to confess, not to promise, but to give me something I didn't know I needed. Not a confession, not a kiss, but a chance to feel, to love. Not beyond time, but with it. If you find yourself in this story, if you have ever loved lost, started over, subscribe to our channel to listen to stories that touch your heart. Every week, we continue to tell the quietest, yet most profound things in life. Late love, forgotten memories, or a look that can change your heart. Stay with us and continue writing the chapters of life that have not yet been closed. Subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss any stories.